Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about maximum security containment facilities, Avery thought, as she stepped off the transport shuttle, was that they never looked quite as terrifying as you'd expect. This one, perched on the dark side of a moon nobody bothered naming, resembled a particularly bland corporate office building. If corporate office buildings needed plasma shields and enough firepower to crack a small planet. She adjusted her uniform collar and tried not to think about the fact that she was about to walk into a place specifically designed to hold things that could kill her in increasingly creative ways. "You're late," growled a voice that sounded like gravel being chewed by a garbage disposal. Avery turned to find Commander Dralmoth looming in the entrance archway, all 6 arms crossed in what she'd learned was the Rakthari equivalent of extreme disapproval. His scales caught the dim light, shifting from deep purple to an irritated crimson. On his homeworld, that color change meant someone was about 30 seconds from getting disemboweled. "Traffic was murder," Avery replied, fighting to keep a straight face. "Literally. There was a shipping accident near the third moon. Cargo pods everywhere. Very dramatic." Dralmoth's inner eyelids flickered, his species version of a long-suffering sigh. "You are aware, Lieutenant Avery, that this is your final assessment, not a social gathering?" "Oh, I'm painfully aware, Commander." She fell into step beside him as they entered the facility, her boots clicking against the metallic floor. "Though I have to say, your invitation was very ominous. Report to Facility 9 for final evaluation. Prepare accordingly." I half expected a funeral notice to follow. "Some cadets do send them preemptively," Dralmoth said, and Avery couldn't tell if he was joking. The hallways stretched ahead, lined with reinforced doors that had more locks than seemed mathematically necessary. Through small observation windows, Avery caught glimpses of the facility's residents. A creature made entirely of what looked like angry shadows, something that appeared to be a floating brain surrounded by teeth. A being that, honestly, she couldn't even process what she was looking at, and her brain politely suggested she stop trying. "So," Avery ventured, because silence made her nervous, and nervousness made her chatty. "On a scale of mild inconvenience to writing my will on the shuttle ride here, how concerned should I be?" Dralmoth stopped walking, all 6 arms uncrossed, and he turned to face her with an expression that managed to convey grave seriousness, despite having a face structure nothing like a human's. "Lieutenant Avery," he said slowly, "in my 30 cycles as an instructor at the Galactic Peacekeeping Institute, I have trained over 2,000 cadets across 60 species. I have sent them into war zones, diplomatic disasters, and situations that would give most beings nightmares for generations." He paused, his scales darkening to a deep, warning black. "This assessment terrifies me more than any of those." Well, that was not comforting. They arrived at a briefing room where a dozen other cadets were already assembled, the best of the best from this cycle's graduating class. Avery recognized most of them. There was Frill, a Mantarian whose species could literally smell fear, and who found Avery's constant amusement in stressful situations deeply confusing. Next to him sat Plume and Plume, a binary organism that shared one consciousness across 2 bodies, and who always, without fail, finished each other's sentences in a way that would have been adorable if it wasn't so unsettling. A few others she knew by sight, if not by name. A crystalline being who communicated through light pulses, something that looked like a very dignified otter wearing battle armor, and a gaseous entity contained in what appeared to be a very fancy jar. They all looked nervous, No, scratch that. They looked absolutely petrified. "Take your positions," Dralmoth commanded, and the room fell silent. Even the usual ambient chittering, humming, and occasional telepathic static that came with a mixed-species group died away. Avery slid into an empty seat near the back, next to the armored otter, who gave her a look that clearly communicated, "You're about to regret every life choice that led you here." Probably accurate. Dralmoth activated the holo display at the front of the room. An image materialized, a containment cell heavily reinforced, with more warning symbols plastered on it than Avery had ever seen in one place. And she'd once accidentally wandered into a biological warfare research facility. "Subject 19 Prime," Dralmoth announced, his voice dropping into what Avery privately called his imminent death register. "Also known as the Widowmaker." A murmur rippled through the assembled cadets. The otter thing beside Avery made a high-pitched whimpering sound. "For your final assessment," Dralmoth continued, "one of you will enter this containment cell and conduct an interview with the subject. You will have 30 minutes to gather information, establish communication protocols, and, most importantly, survive." He let that last word hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Now," he said, his scales shifting to a grim gray, "before anyone volunteers, let me be exceptionally clear about what you're facing." He manipulated the holo display, and a list appeared. Subject 19 Prime has been interviewed 8 times by 8 different trained professionals. Specialist Krintal, expert in hostile species negotiation, dead. Dr. Finwick, xenopsychologist with 20 cycles of experience, dead. Ambassador Lurak, who once talked down a hive mind from galactic genocide, dead. The list went on, and on, each name followed by a single, terrible word. Dead, dead, dead. "The subject," Dralmoth said, "has a 100% fatality rate for anyone who enters its cell. It is considered the single most dangerous entity in this facility. It cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, and, based on all available evidence, cannot be interviewed without lethal consequences." Avery's hand shot up. "No questions until I'm finished, Lieutenant," Dralmoth snapped. Avery kept her hand up. Dralmoth's scales rippled with irritation. "What? Did they deserve it?" The room went so quiet that Avery could hear her own heartbeat. Every cadet turned to stare at her. Frill's antennae stood straight up in shock. The Plume twins both stopped breathing simultaneously. Dralmoth blinked, then blinked again with his inner eyelids, then blinked with what Avery suspected was a third set of eyelids she hadn't known he possessed. What?" "The 8 people who died," Avery said, keeping her tone casual despite the absolute horror radiating from every other being in the room. "Did they deserve it? I mean, you said the subject killed them. But did the subject have a reason? Were they threatened? Provoked? Did these so-called experts do something that might have, I don't know, justified a violent response? You could have heard a pin drop. In space. On the other side of the moon." "Lieutenant Avery," Dralmoth said slowly, his voice taking on a quality that suggested he was reconsidering every decision that had led to accepting humans into the Institute. "That is not how we approach this assessment." "But it seems like a relevant question," Avery pressed, genuinely confused by the reaction. "I mean, if I'm about to walk into a cell with something that's killed 8 people, shouldn't I know why it killed them? Context matters, right? There's a difference between this thing murders for fun and this thing defended itself against people who were, perhaps, being incredibly stupid." The armored otter beside her scooted its chair away, subtly but noticeably. Dralmoth's scales cycled through at least 5 different colors in rapid succession: confusion, anger, consideration, more confusion, and finally settling on a sort of bewildered orange that Avery had never seen before. "That," he said finally, "is not... No one has ever..." He paused, all 6 hands making a gesture that Avery's translator helpfully rendered as a phrase that roughly meant, "You've got to be kidding me." In the entire history of this assessment, not a single cadet has asked that question. "Well," Avery said, leaning back in her chair, "maybe that's why they keep dying." The other cadets looked at her like she'd just suggested using a black hole as a swimming pool. "The purpose of this assessment," Dralmoth said, clearly trying to regain control of the situation, "is to test your ability to handle extreme danger with composure and—" "Sure, sure," Avery interrupted, which she knew was incredibly rude, but she was on a roll now. "But you're also selecting for people who will follow protocol even when protocol is clearly getting everyone killed. If 8 people have died doing the exact same thing, maybe, and I'm just throwing this out there, the approach is wrong?" Frill made a noise that Avery's translator couldn't quite process, but which definitely conveyed the sentiment of, "Please stop talking before you get us all killed." Dralmoth stared at her for a long moment. His scales had settled into a deep, thoughtful blue. "You," he said finally, "are volunteering for this assessment?" "I mean, someone has to," Avery replied with a shrug that she hoped looked more confident than she felt. "And since I'm apparently the only one asking the obvious questions, might as well be me." "You understand the risks? 8 dead professionals?" "Yeah, I caught that part." "And you still want to proceed?" Avery stood up, ignoring the way every other cadet leaned away from her like she was contagious. "Commander, I didn't join the Institute to play it safe. I joined because humans are apparently decent at talking to things that want to kill us. It's kind of our specialty." She grinned. "Plus, I'm really curious now. What kind of being has a perfect kill record but is still being kept alive and studied? That's not standard protocol for uncontrollable threats. So either someone thinks it's worth keeping around or—" She trailed off, her mind working. Or maybe it's not actually uncontrollable. Maybe everyone's just been asking the wrong questions. Dralmoth's scales shifted again, this time to a color Avery definitely hadn't seen before, something between respect and resigned horror. "Very well, Lieutenant Avery," he said. "Report to Containment Cell 19 at 0800 tomorrow. I'll have the medical team on standby." He paused. "And the funeral arrangements team, just in case." "Optimistic," Avery muttered. "I like that in a commanding officer." As she left the briefing room, she could hear the other cadets erupting into chatter behind her. Frill's voice rose above the others, translated into panicked standard. "She's insane! Humans are absolutely insane!" Avery couldn't help but smile. Yeah, probably. But insanity, she'd found, was often just another word for seeing things from an angle nobody else had considered. She had roughly 18 hours to prepare for an interview with something that had killed every single person who'd tried to talk to it. Plenty of time. What could possibly go wrong? The containment cell door had more warning labels than a toxic waste dump designed by paranoid lawyers. Avery stood in front of it at precisely 0800, reading her favorites aloud to the increasingly anxious guards flanking her. "Lethal force authorized. Classic. Do not attempt physical contact. Reasonable. Oh, here's a good one. In case of catastrophic containment breach, abandon facility immediately. Not try to fix it or sound the alarm. Just run. I appreciate the honesty." The guard on her left, a towering being covered in what looked like animated moss, made a ihide sound like wind through dead trees. Her translator rendered it as, "Last chance to reconsider, human." "Where's the fun in that?" Avery replied, checking her equipment one final time. No weapons, those were forbidden. Just a standard datapad, a translation device far more sophisticated than the one embedded in her uniform, and a small emergency beacon that would supposedly summon help if things went sideways. Emphasis on supposedly. Given the survival rate, she wasn't holding her breath. Drellmoth's voice crackled through the comm system. "Lieutenant Avery, you have 30 minutes. The cell is shielded, but we'll be monitoring through surveillance. If the subject makes any threatening moves—" "You'll do what, exactly?" Avery asked. "Given that 8 people have already died in there, I'm guessing your intervention protocols aren't particularly effective." Silence from the comm. Then, grudgingly, "Just try not to die. I'll add it to my to-do list, right after have pleasant conversation with supposed murder machine." The door unsealed with a hiss that sounded ominously final. Avery took a deep breath, possibly her last, her brain helpfully suggested, and stepped inside. The cell was larger than she'd expected, and stranger. The walls weren't standard reinforced metal, but something that looked almost organic, with a slight luminescence that cast everything in an eerie blue-green glow. The temperature was comfortable, the air surprisingly fresh, and in the center of the space, occupying an area roughly the size of a small vehicle, was Subject 19 Prime. Avery stopped walking, not out of fear, well, not entirely, but out of genuine awe. The being before her was beautiful, terrible and beautiful in equal measure. Its form seemed to shift between states of matter, crystalline structures erupting from what appeared to be organic tissue, then dissolving back into something that resembled liquid light. Colors moved through it like oil on water, iridescent, hypnotic, utterly alien. "So," Avery said, keeping her voice steady, "you're the Widowmaker." The creature rippled. A sound emerged, not from any visible mouth, but from the air itself, vibrating in frequencies that made Avery's teeth ache. Her translator struggled for a moment, then rendered it into standard. "Another one. Another fool sent to poke and prod and die." The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It simply was. "Make it quick, human. I tire of this ritual." "Yeah, about that," Avery said, and then did something that would have given Drellmoth a cardiac episode if Rakthari had cardiac episodes. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and set her datapad beside her. "I'm not here to poke or prod. I'm here to talk." The creature's form stilled, almost imperceptibly, but Avery caught it. "They all say that," it said, but something in its tone had shifted. Curiosity, maybe? "They all claim they want to communicate or understand. Then they activate their sedation fields, or their neural probes, or their tissue samplers." "Okay, yeah, that sounds awful," Avery agreed. "But see, I don't actually have any of those things. They wouldn't let me bring weapons, which, fair enough, but they also wouldn't let me bring any kind of invasive equipment." She spread her hands, showing they were empty. "I've got a datapad for taking notes and a translator because my command of subsonic vibration speech is, frankly, terrible. That's it." The creature moved closer. Not threateningly, but with the cautious curiosity of something that had been burned before. Literally, in at least 2 cases, based on the reports Avery had skimmed. "You ask questions then," it said, "about my biology, my weaknesses, my homeworld's location, information for your superiors to exploit." "Actually," Avery said, "I was going to ask about the 8 people you killed. Specifically, did they deserve it?" The creature stopped moving entirely. The colors flowing through its form froze mid-shift. What? It's a genuine question, Avery continued. See, everyone outside this cell keeps calling you a murderer, a monster, an uncontrollable threat. But nobody, and I mean nobody, has bothered to ask whether you had a reason. Self-defense is a thing. Justifiable homicide is a thing. So I'm asking, did those 8 people do something that warranted a lethal response? For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the containment field. Then the creature laughed. It wasn't quite laughter, but the emotion behind the sound was unmistakable. "You are either very stupid," it said, "or very dangerous." "I'm hearing that a lot lately," Avery admitted. "For what it's worth, I'm leaning toward dangerous. Stupid people don't usually make it through xenobiology training without accidentally poisoning themselves." The creature shifted again, its form becoming slightly more solid, more defined. Features that might have been eyes appeared in what might have been a face. "The first one," it said quietly, "Specialist Krintal. He did not come to interview me. He came to vivisect me, while I was conscious, to see, as he said, how my neural pathways responded to extreme pain." Avery felt her stomach turn. "Okay, yeah. That's absolutely grounds for killing someone." "The second," the creature continued, its voice taking on a rhythm like it was reciting a list it had memorized long ago. "Dr. Finwick, he wanted to weaponize my genetic material, create biological agents based on my cellular structure. He told me this, proudly, as if I should be honored to become a plague." "Definitely deserved it," Avery muttered, making notes on her datapad. "The third, Ambassador Lurak, wanted to sell my offspring." The creature's form flickered with something that looked like rage. "I have 16 children scattered across my homeworld." He had already begun negotiations with collectors, black market dealers in exotic sentience. "Oh, that guy, super, deserved it," Avery said, her voice hard. "Please tell me it was painful." The creature tilted what might have been its head. "You believe me?" "Why wouldn't I?" Avery looked up from her datapad. "Look, I've been studying xenobiology for 6 years. You know what I've learned? The species we label as monsters are usually just defending themselves from us. We're the ones who show up, start taking samples without asking, treating sentient beings like lab specimens, and then act shocked when they fight back." She shook her head. "It's not that complicated." The creature moved closer still, until it was only a few meters away. This close, Avery could see the incredible complexity of its structure. Thousands of tiny crystalline formations, each one catching and refracting light in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Almost like writing? "My name," the creature said softly, "is Ulim. I have not spoken it aloud since my capture." "Ulim," Avery repeated, committing it to memory. "I'm Avery, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what they did to you. For what they tried to do." "You are sorry?" Ulim's form rippled with what might have been disbelief. "You are human. Your species is known throughout the galaxy for your aggression, your territorial expansion, your endless curiosity that tramples over the rights of others." "Yeah, we've got a pretty terrible track record," Avery admitted. "But here's the thing about humans. We're also really, really good at recognizing when we've screwed up. Eventually, usually after making the same mistake a bunch of times. But still," she grinned. "Plus, we're excellent at asking uncomfortable questions that everyone else is too polite to mention. Like whether my victims deserved their fate. Exactly like that." Ulim settled onto the floor across from Avery, mirroring her seated position. It was such a deliberately peaceful gesture that Avery felt something tight in her chest loosen. The others, Ulim said, the remaining 5, each one came with violence in their hearts, with greed, with the intention to cause me harm or exploit me for profit. I am a guardian species, Avery. My kind evolved to protect. We sense threat. We respond to malice. Every being who has entered this cell has radiated hostility. Except me? Except you. Ulim's crystalline structures chimed softly. You radiate curiosity, genuine interest, and something else. Something I have not felt from any of your kind before. Righteous anger at injustice? Avery suggested. Because honestly, the more you tell me about this, the angrier I get. Not at you. At them. Yes, Ulim said simply. That. Avery glanced at her datapad. 15 minutes had passed. 15 minutes, and she was still alive, having what felt like an actual conversation rather than an interrogation. Ulim, she said carefully, why are you really here? Because maximum security containment for something that only kills in self-defense doesn't make sense. There's more to this, isn't there? The colors in Ulim's form darkened, shifting to deep purples and blacks. Yes, it said, there is much more. And if you truly wish to know, human, you may not leave this cell alive either. Avery leaned forward, ignoring the way her survival instincts were screaming at her to back away. You know what? I'm already sitting in a room with something that supposedly killed 8 people. If I was worried about staying alive, I wouldn't be here in the first place. So yeah, tell me, what's really going on? Ulim's form pulsed, colors shifting through shades that Avery's human eyes probably weren't even fully equipped to perceive. My homeworld is called Pelax. It orbits a blue star in what your charts designate as Sector 92. Beautiful world, rich in minerals that your species and others find valuable. Let me guess, Avery said, her tone dry. Someone decided those minerals were more important than the people living there? The Galactic Peacekeeping Institute authorized a mining survey. Ulim continued, each word resonating with barely controlled rage. Routine, they said. Non-invasive, they claimed. My colony raised concerns. We are guardians. We can sense disruption to our world's balance. The surveyors ignored us. Then they began extraction operations without consent. Avery felt her jaw tighten. That's illegal, under about 15 different interstellar treaties. Yes, it is. Ulim's crystalline structures chimed discordantly. My people protested peacefully. We filed complaints through proper channels. We requested arbitration. And while we waited for responses that never came, the mining operations expanded. They carved into sacred spawning grounds. They contaminated water sources. 38 of my colony died from toxins introduced into our ecosystem. Oh, hell, Avery breathed. I witnessed it all, Ulim said, and now its form was flickering rapidly, like a strobe light of contained fury. My species has a unique capability, Avery. We record everything we observe. Not in memory, in our physical structure. Each crystalline formation you see is a stored moment, a preserved truth. I carry within me evidence of every crime committed on Pelax, every violation, every death. Understanding crashed over Avery like a cold wave. That's why you're here. Not because you're dangerous, because you're a witness. I am an inconvenient truth in a very convenient lie, Ulim confirmed. When peaceful protest failed, some of my people took direct action. They sabotaged equipment. Nothing violent, just disabled machinery, blocked access routes. Your galactic peacekeeping forces responded with what they termed necessary containment measures. The bitterness in those words could have stripped paint. I was captured while defending hatchlings from armed soldiers, brought here, labeled as hostile, as uncontrollable. And every person they've sent to interview you, Avery said slowly, pieces clicking together, wasn't really here to communicate. They were here to, what? Erase you? Destroy the evidence you're carrying? Or to extract it for their own purposes, Ulim added. To control the narrative. To ensure that if my testimony ever emerged, it would be through channels they controlled. Discredited as the ravings of a violent creature. Avery stood up, pacing the length of the cell while her mind raced. Okay. This is massive. We're not talking about a rogue operation. If the Institute authorized this, and if they're actively covering it up, she ran a hand through her hair. Ulim, do you know how many officials would have to be involved in something like this? Enough, Ulim said quietly, that exposing it would destabilize significant portions of the galactic peacekeeping structure. Why do you think I am still alive? They cannot kill me outright. Too many questions, too much attention. But they can keep me contained, isolated, labeled as too dangerous to release. And if I happen to die during a routine interrogation gone wrong, the creature's form shimmered with dark humor. Accidents happen. Not on my watch, Avery said firmly. She pulled out her datapad, fingers flying across the interface. We need to get this information out. Can you, I don't know, transfer your recordings somehow? Translate them into data my equipment can process? I could, Ulim said carefully. But the moment any significant data transfer occurs, their monitoring systems will detect it. This cell is shielded, but not from internal surveillance. Everything we have said, everything you are doing right now, they are watching. Avery froze. Then, very deliberately, she smiled up at the nearest surveillance camera and waved. Yeah, I figured, she said calmly. Hi, Commander Dralmoth. Enjoying the show? Through the comm system, which Avery had suspected was active this entire time, despite the supposed communication blackout during assessments, came a long, heavy silence. Then Dralmoth's voice, carefully controlled. Lieutenant Avery, you are recording classified information. I'm recording my research notes, Avery countered, keeping her tone light and professional. As required by assessment protocols, detailed observations of subject behavior, communication patterns, and, here's a fun one, credible testimony regarding potential war crimes committed under Institute jurisdiction. She tilted her head. Unless you'd like to officially order me to stop documenting my findings, because I feel like that would raise some interesting questions. Another pause. Longer this time. You are playing a dangerous game, Dralmoth said finally. Funny, Avery replied. I was just thinking the same thing about whoever authorized illegal mining operations on Pelax. You know about that, right, Commander? Or is this one of those need-to-know situations where the instructors training the next generation of peacekeepers somehow don't need to know about the Institute committing atrocities? Ulim watched this exchange with what Avery was pretty sure was fascination. You are either suicidally brave or dangerously stupid. Yeah, I know, Avery interrupted. Everyone keeps saying that. But here's what I think. I think if this information stays buried, if Ulim stays locked in this cell until some convenient accident happens, then everything the Institute claims to stand for is worthless. Justice, protection, peacekeeping. She practically spat the last word. What a joke. You can't keep peace by crushing anyone who witnesses your crimes. She turned back to her datapad, pulling up her official assessment documentation interface. So, here's what I'm doing, Commander, and everyone else watching this incredibly not private conversation. I am filing a formal incident report, as is my right and obligation as an Institute cadet. Said report includes Subject 19 Prime's testimony regarding events on Pelex, which, until someone can prove otherwise, I am treating as credible evidence requiring investigation. Her fingers danced across the screen. I'm also requesting immediate diplomatic contact with Pelaxian representatives, a full review of mining authorization in Sector 92, and, oh, this is a good one, a medical evaluation of Subject 19 Prime to determine if containment conditions meet minimum sentient rights standards. Because, fun fact, keeping someone in solitary confinement for cycles while periodically sending people to torture them is generally frowned upon by those pesky interstellar rights conventions. Lieutenant, Dralmoth's voice carried a warning tone. You are exceeding your authority. Actually, Avery said, pulling up another document and reading directly from it, Institute Regulation 439, subsection M states that any cadet who encounters evidence of potential rights violations during the course of their duties is required, not encouraged, required, to file a report within 24 hours of discovery. I'm just being efficient and doing it immediately. She looked up at the camera again. Unless you'd like to go on record stating that regulation doesn't apply in this situation, I feel like that would be a fascinating thing to have in the official transcript. Ulim made a sound that was definitely laughter this time, chiming and resonant. I have never seen anyone weaponize bureaucracy quite so effectively. Humans invented bureaucracy, Avery said with a grin. We know all its weak points. She hit the send command on her datapad, transmitting her report through official channels. There, done. Now everyone from cadets to council members will have access to this filing. Can't disappear something once it's in the system and distributed across multiple servers. The comm crackled. You have no idea what you have just done. I've done my job, Avery shot back, which is more than I can say for whoever's been covering this up. She paused, then added more softly, Commander, I know you. You're not corrupt. You wouldn't have become an instructor if you didn't believe in what the Institute is supposed to represent. So either you didn't know about this, in which case, welcome to the worst surprise of your life, or you did know, and you've been looking for a way to expose it without destroying your career. She took a breath. This assessment, sending cadets to interview something that kills everyone, that's a weird protocol. Almost like, I don't know, like someone was hoping eventually a cadet would come along who'd actually listen, who'd ask the right questions, who'd be too stubborn or stupid to follow the script. Silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Then, so quietly Avery almost missed it. The medical team and funeral arrangement staff have been dismissed. What? You heard me, Lieutenant. Dralmoth's voice carried something new now. Resignation, maybe, or relief. I see no need for emergency medical personnel when the assessment is proceeding without incident. Congratulations. You have survived your 30 minutes. The cell will unseal in 60 seconds. Avery blinked. Then, understanding dawned. You magnificent six-armed reptilian genius. This whole thing was a setup. I have no idea what you are implying, Dralmoth said, but Avery could hear the faint hint of satisfaction in his voice. Report to debriefing room 12 in 1 hour. Ulim, we will be discussing your legal status and transfer arrangements. Transfer? Ulim's form brightened, literally. You mean... I mean, Dralmoth interrupted, that if Lieutenant Avery's report triggers a full investigation, which it will, then your containment status comes under immediate review pending that investigation. Standard protocol. By the book. Nothing irregular whatsoever. The cell door began to unseal with a hiss of releasing pressure. Avery looked at Ulim, then at the camera, then back to Ulim. Did we just accidentally uncover a conspiracy while simultaneously passing my final assessment? I believe, Ulim said, its form shifting to warm golden hues. We did something far more important than that. Yeah? Avery shouldered her datapad, grinning. What's that? We asked the right question. The debriefing room was less room and more uncomfortably small box with chairs, which Avery suspected was intentional. Nothing made people talk faster than claustrophobia and bad lighting. Dral Moth sat across from her, all 6 arms folded in various configurations that suggested he was working through about 9 different emotions simultaneously. His scales had settled into a mottled gray-green that Avery's limited knowledge of Rakthari physiology couldn't quite interpret. So, she said, because someone had to break the silence and she'd never been good at waiting. How much trouble am I in? Scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is mild reprimand and 10 is thrown out an airlock. That depends, Drulmoth replied, his voice carefully neutral, on your definition of trouble. The kind that ends with me not graduating, not being able to work in xenobiology ever again, having mysterious accidents involving airlocks? One of Drulmoth's hands made a gesture that Avery's translator rendered as something between a shrug and a wave of dismissal. Your report has been received by the Institute Council. Within the hour, it had been escalated to the Interstellar Rights Commission. Within 3 hours, diplomatic channels with Pelax had been opened. He paused. Within 5 hours, mining operations in Sector 92 were suspended pending investigation. Avery sat up straighter. Wait, seriously? That fast? That fast, Drulmoth confirmed. It turns out that when someone files a properly formatted, thoroughly documented report citing specific regulations and treaty violations, backed by eyewitness testimony from a being whose species is known to record observable truth with perfect accuracy, bureaucratic wheels turn remarkably quickly. Huh, Avery processed this. So I'm not in trouble? I did not say that. Drulmoth leaned forward, and now his scales shifted to that warning crimson she'd seen before. You disobeyed direct implications, circumvented security protocols, and effectively accused Institute officials of war crimes. Several highly placed individuals are extremely unhappy with you. But I followed the regulations, Avery protested. You said it yourself. Proper format, proper documentation, proper channels. Yes, which is precisely why they cannot touch you. The crimson faded, replaced by something that might have been satisfaction. You weaponized our own systems against corruption. Very human, very effective, very annoying for those who preferred the status quo. Avery grinned. So what you're saying is, I passed? You did more than pass, Lieutenant Avery. Drulmoth pulled up a holodisplay between them. You exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Institute administration. 3 officials have already resigned. 5 more are under investigation. The mining corporation involved has lost its operational license pending review of its practices across 20 other systems. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And you saved Ulim's life. Make no mistake, that being would have been dead within another cycle. They were running out of excuses to keep attempting interviews. The weight of that settled over Avery like a heavy blanket. She'd known intellectually that Ulim was in danger, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that tightened her chest. How is Ulim? She asked quietly. Released from containment as of 2 hours ago, Drulmoth said, and was that actual warmth in his voice? Currently in medical receiving proper treatment for injuries sustained during capture. A diplomatic envoy from Pelax is en route. Ulim will be returned home within the next planetary rotation, with full reparations authorized by Emergency Council decree. Good, Avery said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That's really good. There is more. Dralamoth manipulated the display, and a new document appeared. Ulim has requested that you be present during testimony to the Rights Commission, as, quote, the only being who bothered to ask if I deserved justice. Avery felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Yeah, I can do that. Additionally, Dralamoth continued, and now there was definitely something in his expression that looked like pride. Your assessment has been entered into Institute records as Case Study 19 Prime. It will be taught to future cadets as an example of proper application of critical thinking, ethical responsibility, and— He paused, as if the next words physically pained him. Creative problem-solving in the face of institutional resistance. You're kidding. I do not kid about curriculum, Lieutenant. Avery laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. So, let me get this straight. I walk into a cell with something that's killed 8 people, accuse my superiors of war crimes, file paperwork that upends an entire mining operation, and somehow this becomes a teaching moment? Welcome to the Galactic Peacekeeping Institute, Dralamoth said dryly, where we train individuals to question, to challenge, and, when absolutely necessary, to burn down broken systems and build better ones. His scales shifted through a rainbow of colors. Though I would appreciate it if you did not make a habit of the burning down part. My stress levels are not what they used to be. No promises, Avery said, but she was smiling. A chime sounded at the door. Dralamoth's scales rippled with surprise. Enter! The door opened, and Ulim flowed into the room. Literally flowed, its form more liquid than solid now, moving with a grace that suggested it was no longer in pain or restrained. The colors pulsing through its crystalline structures were bright and warm, nothing like the dark, angry hues from the cell. Avery, Ulim said, and hearing its voice outside that terrible containment space made everything feel more real somehow. I came to thank you properly. You don't have to. Avery started, but Ulim moved closer, its form shifting and compacting until it was roughly at eye level with her. My people have a tradition, Ulim said. When someone saves a life, when someone acts with honor and courage, we give them a fragment of ourselves, a memory crystal, not just as thanks, but as testimony, so that the act of kindness is never forgotten. Something small and bright separated from Ulim's body, a crystalline structure no larger than Avery's thumbnail, glowing with soft blue light. It floated through the air and settled into her palm, warm and surprisingly weightless. This crystal contains the moment you asked your question, Ulim explained. The moment someone finally saw me as worthy of justice rather than judgment. My people will know of this. Your name will be spoken with honor on Pelex for generations. Avery stared at the crystal, then at Ulim, and found she couldn't quite speak past the lump in her throat. Also, Ulim added, its tone shifting to something that might have been humor, I am told that I may file a commendation on your behalf. For your training record. I have done so. It reads, quote, Lieutenant Avery is dangerously competent and should be promoted immediately before she accidentally reforms the entire institute. Dralamoth made a choking sound that might have been laughter. That's, Avery managed. That's amazing. Thank you. For the crystal. For the commendation. For not killing me when you definitely could have. You never gave me reason to, Ulim said simply. You treated me as a person. as someone whose story mattered. That is rarer than you might think, even among those who claim to champion justice. They stood there for a moment, human and alien, sharing understanding that transcended species and circumstance. "When you return to Pelix," Avery said finally, "tell your people I'm sorry for what happened, for what took so long to fix, and tell them that not everyone in the Institute knew, that some of us actually meant it when we swore to protect and serve." "I will tell them," Ulim promised. "And perhaps, when my world has healed, you might visit? My children would like to meet the human who asked the right question." "I'd like that," Avery said, closing her fingers around the crystal. "I'd like that a lot." Ulim inclined its form in what might have been a bow, then flowed out of the room, leaving behind a faint luminescence that slowly faded. Dralmoth watched the door close, then turned to Avery with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You asked me once what your final assessment would measure. Do you remember?" "Not really. I ask a lot of questions." "It was meant to measure whether you could follow protocol in the face of extreme danger," Dralmoth said. "Whether you could maintain composure when confronted with something terrifying. Whether you valued your own survival over your mission objectives." He paused. "You failed all of those metrics." Avery's heart sank. "Oh." "And in doing so," Dralmoth continued, his scales shifting to brilliant gold, "you demonstrated qualities far more important: empathy, moral courage, the ability to see past propaganda and procedure to fundamental truth, the wisdom to ask questions everyone else was afraid to voice." He stood, all 6 arms spreading in a gesture that Avery's translator rendered as profound respect. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Avery. You have passed your final assessment with the highest marks I have ever awarded." Avery felt tears prickling at her eyes and absolutely refused to let them fall. "So, what happens now?" "Now?" Dralmoth moved toward the door. "Now you graduate. You receive your commission. And you go out into this vast, complicated, often unjust galaxy, and you continue doing exactly what you did today." He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "You ask uncomfortable questions. You challenge comfortable lies. You fight for those who have no voice." "No pressure or anything," Avery muttered, but she was smiling. "Oh, there is immense pressure," Dralmoth assured her. "The galaxy is watching now. The human who stopped a conspiracy, saved a life, and reformed Institute protocols with nothing but determination and well-filed paperwork." His scales rippled with amusement. "Your species has a phrase, I believe? Something about humanity and their tendency to succeed through unconventional means?" "Humanity, yeah," Avery said softly, looking down at the crystal glowing in her palm. "The question that changed everything. Did they deserve it?" Sometimes, she reflected, the most dangerous thing you could do was simply ask why.